This is a cinematic drone shot. Now, you see, what makes these drone shots cinematic and different from every other drone shot that you see around is that they have each had a series of essential elements applied. I've managed to learn these elements over the past 5 years of operating drones and have finally been able to piece them all together into an 8-stage process that will take your drone shot sequence from something like this to something more like this. Alrighty, so this right here is the DJI Air 3. It's the drone that I'm going to be using today to demonstrate my entire 8-stage process, and it's also my most recent purchase to add into my drone arsenal. Now, although this drone does in fact have 2 cameras on it, each of these stages can all be completed with the use of a single camera drone like the Mini 3 or the Mavics. So, without any further ado, let's dive right on into it. Stage 1, movement. Straight off the bat, this one sounds very simple, and well, the principle behind it is, obviously, you need to have movement with your drone to be able to take off and fly places. And also, quite simply, I'm not here to teach you how to do that. So to move over to what's important here, allow me to introduce the words intentional movement. I like to think of movement within a drone shot as mostly essential. It can often be the difference between a shot working and not working. So it's actually really important to really consider what movement you're putting in to every single shot. Something I learned from Nicholas, which I really didn't realize, was that the movement is not only a visual element that makes your footage look better, but it also plays a massive part in your storytelling as well. Left to right movements make the viewer feel like the scene is moving forwards or progressing to the future, whereas right to left movements make the scene feel like it's going back in time and into the past. This all makes the intention behind your movement super important for what you're trying to put together, but if we do put storytelling to the side for a moment, there are some general movements too that you can practice to start nailing that cinematic look. The first is the side on track. This is perfect for times when you have a moving subject like a car, bike, or person, where you can effectively fly sideways at the same speed as them, keeping them in the same place in the frame. It's super simple to achieve, and it's only a single stick movement. In fact, this exact concept can be used for a top-down shot, a following shot, or a front-on shot. If you're looking to step it up a notch, however, it's time to introduce dual stick movement. There are hundreds of combinations of movements that I could run you through here, but for the sake of time, we're just going to focus on one called the parallax. For this, you can use a combination of the right-hand stick and the left-hand stick, pushing both inwards at the same time. What this is going to do is it's going to create a parallax between your subject and the background, or vice versa if your background is the subject. We're going to be taking this move particularly to an even greater level shortly, so it's very important that you nail the basics here and understand how to control your drone smoothly while actually understanding what you're doing. The biggest takeaway here though is not just the fact that you're creating an intentional movement, but it's more so the fact that this movement is specifically for the video shot itself. All too often I see drone footage where it's pretty obvious that the drone operator has just hit record and then started flying around capturing video footage as they go. You see the hard turns, the abrupt stops, the inconsistency in speed with their tracking, you name it. The second that you actually take the time to stop your drone, think about the shot that you want to get, and then perform a specific movement for that shot, is the second that you'll start to see some results you're much happier with. Keep your shot smooth, steady, and end it before the drone makes a sharp turn or something. Super important stuff here. Stage 2, height. Tailing off of movement, we've now got the height to think about. Believe it or not, this is just as important as movement itself, because if you're up 100 meters in the air, your results are going to be drastically different to if you're performing the exact same maneuver close to the ground. This is the case because you're introducing something called a foreground element. It's where you're putting something in between your background or your subject and using it to elevate your movement more. By being at a lower height, you're putting the ground in the frame, allowing the movement of your shot to be exaggerated. This is specifically useful if you're wanting to have a faster paced shot, or if you just want to introduce something a bit more dynamic. The opposite can be said about being up higher. Flying at a higher altitude will make it seem like things are moving a whole lot slower, and it'll also be providing you with a wide establishing shot. It's perfect if you're trying to show off larger landscapes or locations like a racetrack, as it gets everything in the frame and isn't so fast that the viewer can't see what's happening. Personally, I'm a massive fan of flying closer to the ground for the majority of my shots involving a subject, and to be fair, I still do tend to fly close to objects like rocks if I'm shooting landscapes. Stage 3, speed. All right, stage 3 is the last of the simple stages. After this one, things can start to get a little bit more advanced and you can really start to have a shot that you're going to be blown away with. As you figured out from stage 2, speed can be relative to the height that you're flying at, but it can also be fully controlled by how far you're actually moving these sticks. For example, just because I'm flying close to the ground doesn't mean that I can't go slow, it just means that I have to chill out on the sticks a bit. The same can be said for being higher up. It doesn't guarantee that your shot is going to be moving slowly, as you can simply go harder on the sticks and provide the drone with a bit more boost. What's super important to understand from stage 3 is actually what you plan on creating in post-production. What are you planning on actually editing? Is it a slow-paced scene with piano music, or is it a high-intensity scene with rock? Not only is it important to know what your plan is for the editing stage of things, but you also need to understand if the pacing is even going to work with the scene that you have. For example, scenery would be much better suited for a slow-paced edit with either super droney sounds or soft relaxing music, whereas something like motocross riding is going to suit a high-intensity, more energetic style of editing. Both of these examples require different speeds of shots to make sure they fit in as smoothly as possible within your edit. So you actually need to know your outcome in order to shoot the most effective footage for it. To really nail this example in, I'm going to show you an example of what a motocross scene looks like when edited at a high intensity, and then also a motocross scene when edited at a low intensity with slightly slower and less high energy shots within it. I'm sure from that you can actually see and possibly even feel the difference between the two scenes. One feels a whole lot more connected and smooth, whereas the other feels a little too slow and far away. So just make sure that you're shooting with an edit in mind and match your speed with the scene. That way you'll be able to create a masterpiece that you're actually really proud of. Stage 4, the gimbal. This stage is perhaps one of my absolute favorite stages, as it allows me to finally be able to bring in a whole extra dynamic movement that I've previously been limited from within the last 3 stages. This stage is all about that little gimbal that's stuck on the front of your drone. It's a tiny little gimbal that allows you to not only reframe your shot and get a different angle, but also to smoothly move your angle around as you're shooting a shot. That means to actually harness the power of the gimbal, you need to learn how to be smooth with operating it as you are actually flying the drone itself around. The speed of both the gimbal and the drone can be controlled by the different modes on your controller, where Cine mode is the slowest, allowing for the smoothest shots, and Sport mode is the fastest, removing nearly all smoothing from the gimbal. This additional movement, when used in conjunction with the past 3 stages, can create a parallax shot that honestly looks like it was taken from a helicopter. To do this effectively, you basically need to combine a constant change in movement with a constant height adjustment, and then match your speed with your gimbal tilt. What you're doing is you're locking onto whatever your subject is with the gimbal and yaw of the drone, and then creating a dynamic movement with the height and general movement from the drone itself. Once you learn to master this, you're really going to be able to shoot footage that others just don't know how to get. Of course, the gimbal movement doesn't always have to be combined with a complicated set of stick movements. In fact, some of the best shots I've actually shot are with one stick and just the gimbal wheel. The first is a basic but effective revealing shot. You can do this in 2 ways. Firstly, by starting with the gimbal pointing at the ground and then the drone fairly close to the ground as well. Then start a constant forwards movement while you're slowly tilting the gimbal upwards, and now you're shooting a reveal. The other way around is the same principle, but with a different gimbal movement. Simply start by pointing your gimbal as high as you can, and then start your forwards movement with a slow gimbal tilt down as you're flying forwards. One of my other favorite shots is to start at a lower height facing your subject, but hiding it behind a foreground object. As you start to ascend and reveal your subject, you assist this movement with a matching gimbal tilt down, providing you with yet another epic revealing type of shot. Honestly, there are unlimited numbers of shots that I wish I could show you in this video, but instead, for the sake of time, I just urge you to go out there and practice combining the gimbal tilt with the previous 3 stages. Stage 5, focal length. Now this is where drones like the Air 3 really start to come in handy. The 2 cameras on this drone are 24mm equivalent, which is the standard drone wide angle, and then a 70mm equivalent, which is a 3x zoom. There are two main things that this camera introduces. The first is pretty obvious, with it being a case of reframing your shot at a tighter angle, but the second is personally my favorite, where it introduces more compression. This shift in perspective is a massive deal for making your shots more cinematic and also helping make them stand out from every other drone shot out there. Not many people have actually learned to master these additional zoom cameras as well as they have the standard wide cameras, so there's a whole lot more room to actually stand out within the drone scene. I did mention too that all these stages can be completed with any drone, and this still stands true, but just not to the exact same standard for this particular stage. On drones like the Mavic 2 Pro, when you flick over to 4K HQ mode, the drone crops into about a 1.4 times zoom as it's using a smaller part of the sensor. By doing this, we're still left with 4K quality, just with a tighter field of view, meaning that you're getting a less wide shot, therefore making it seem less like the standard wide angle shot that we're all so used to. At the end of the day, this is mainly a benefit that comes along with upgrading your drone, especially now that we have more budget-friendly drones like the Air 3. So if you're using older technology, it's really just a case of learning how to best utilize what you've already got. Stage 6, lighting. This is seriously the most overlooked stage, and annoyingly is actually something that we can't always control. But there are of course some steps to take to heighten our chances of nailing it. I'm sure by now you've heard the best time to film is sunrise or sunset, and while this is generally true as it comes with long, softer shadows and a bit softer light, it may not also be the cinematic look that you're actually after. For example, the intro scene for my What's in My Camera Bag 2023 video had a completely different vibe to what someone might generally classify as cinematic. For me, I wanted to provide an airy feeling that made the viewers feel like it was a moody, dark sort of scene. Filming this in the midday sunlight or even at a stunning sunrise would have actually completely taken away from the feeling that I was trying to create. Instead, for this scene, I chose an overcast morning where the light was flat and also not too bright, allowing me to play on the side of dark and gloomy. Flip this whole scenario on its head, however, and let's have a look at a scene that you might want the classic dreamy feel for. This sort of scene is 100% going to be best done early morning or early evening when the sun is low and super warm. You're going to get lens flares, long shadows, and a beautiful orange glow, all of which will help complement that dreamy vibe that you're going for. Now, in the case of when the weather isn't playing its part and it's an overcast morning, it may actually just be a case of calling it quits for the moment and waiting for the next morning so that you can guarantee that you're actually getting the mood that you're needing. Stage 7, color grading. So we've now moved on from the shooting processes and have got into the final two stages. These two post-production stages are actually of equal importance, if not more important than the previous 6 stages combined. Why that is, you may be wondering. Well, starting off with this stage, color grading, you have the opportunity to take your footage from good to great, but you also have the potential to take your footage from good to terrible. I had to learn this the hard way, so I am speaking from experience, as I have seriously ruined videos and ruined shots just by simply not understanding how to color grade them properly. Maybe I oversaturated them, blew out the highlights too much, or didn't have the right color temperature. Whatever it was, it made my shots look awful and amateur. This is a skill that you're going to have to develop over time, but by focusing just as much on this one stage as you are on the previous stages, you're going to be able to progress it forward a whole lot quicker. For the most part, I'll always recommend shooting in a log color profile. This gives you the most possible flexibility in the post-production stage, but if you feel really unconfident and just need to nail the shot, shoot in normal color, but make sure you're really dialing in your exposure and color temperature before hitting record. To run you briefly through my process of color grading, however, it generally goes like this for the basics of filming in D-Log-M. First, I add some general contrast to it by raising my highlights, bringing my shadows down, and also pulling my midtones down a bit too. Then I up the overall saturation a bit, making sure not to oversaturate it, however. Next, I head to color temperature and adjust that to make sure it's looking lifelike and not overly warm, cold, green, or purple. Then I take my color curves, bring in some contrast to the remainder of the shot, and finally, I tweak my colors using the hue, saturation, and luminance tools, also known as HSL, to get my desired look, which usually has some form of teal and orange in it. That simple process takes my log shots from this to this. If you were to grade your shots and not know what steps to take, your end results might look something more like this, which, as you can immediately see, looks a whole lot less refined and less cinematic than that of the properly graded footage. Stage 8, sound effects. Now, last but not least in this 8-stage process is sound effects. It may feel very tempting to just skip the stage and call it a day, as I mean, look, you've already got all these great cinematic shots and they look fantastic and you're stoked, right? Trust me when I tell you that this stage will take your visuals to a whole new level. The majority of drones do not record audio, as it would generally sound pretty bad with the wind noise and the sound of props whizzing by the whole time, so it's understandable why they don't come with microphones. What isn't understandable, however, is why most creators don't add sounds back into their cinematic shots one way or another. The general rule of thumb is that a video is 50% visual as it is 50% audible. That means 50% of the entire quality and experience of your drone shots relies on audio being included. For some, that means adding music in, and this is for sure a fantastic way to get started. However, bringing in elements of the perceived sounds from that scene that you're shooting is by far the best way to level everything up. For example, watch this scene here. And now have a watch of this scene. The difference, although in theory it may be fairly subtle, makes a massive difference to how cinematic your shots come across to your audience and hopefully to yourself as well. What sort of sound effects are we talking about here? There are honestly an unlimited number of ways that you can take this. Generally, it also relies on what sort of emotion you're trying to create within your shot, but for the most plain and simple starting point, apply what you see or feel. In the example of, say, an ocean shot, you might say that you'd be able to hear the seagulls, the waves, maybe a boat, a dog, a slight breeze, you name it. Shift over to a shot of a motorcycle and now you've got the engine sound, birds, wind in the trees, dirt flying places, etc., right? And then further yet, to add just one more element on top of all of that, you can also start to think about the sounds of whooshes for objects passing by the drone, tension sounds to transition to a build-up, or even like a slow motion hum if you decide to go for some slow-mo footage. The possibilities really are endless. You don't have to include all of these real-life sounds, but it's a really good addition on top of a great music choice. So by combining all of those 8 stages together, we're able to take what would originally might have been an okay drone shot and turn it into a completely visual cinematic masterpiece. It's important to remember that combining these stages with a great story is what will really mesh everything together, but for the sake of just talking about visuals, mastering just these things will change the game for you. Now, if you're curious to know whether FPV drones are actually better than normal drones, like the Air 3, you can watch this video here now.